Recently I started playing miniature games, a style of games that I wanted to try. I just hadn't because of practical impossibilities, because I can't figure out how to assemble and paint miniatures. I do not have the time to learn. For some games I'm having my miniatures professionally assembled and painted, and then I realized that there's also another option, which is to play miniature games without miniatures. That is, miniature games that rely on miniature mechanics without actually having three-dimensional miniatures that go on the table. One such game, and probably the most famous one, is Battleground. Battleground is mainly famous for its Battleground fantasy warfare series, but they also have a line of historical warfare, and here I have the basic game and the reinforcement pack for the Battleground historical warfare system, which depicts the units of the Second Punic War. The first, the basic game gives you the rules and the basic units. Here you have reinforcements, but you also have a scenario booklet. Very interesting stuff. So, what we have here is, again, a miniature game in which units are represented by laminated cards that move and fight on the board. This way you do not have to worry about painting and assembling miniatures, and you still have that type of experience of playing in a continuous space and playing with distances instead of predetermined areas divided on the board. In any case, I'm going to tell a little bit about the Battleground system here, not so much about the historical warfare, because as far as I understand, it is the same as the fantasy warfare. It is the same system. So I'm going to tell about the system behind both the fantasy and the historical version, so about the Battleground system, and then I'm going to share my impressions about playing battles with these two packs of units here. Units in this game are represented by laminated cards. On one side, the card shows an illustration of the unit as seen from above. On the back, the card gives a description of the unit, and also it tells you if the unit has special abilities, situations in which abilities of the unit may be modified, and things like that. In any case, this is the main thing. The unit, which is just the card that will go on the table and will move around and will fight and will act as your miniature for that unit. The structure of the turn is pretty linear. The first phase is the movement and command phase. During this phase, the units of the active player will move and act according to their standing orders. All units have a circle here, which is the area where you write the standing orders of the unit. There are three standing orders. One is close. That means that the unit that has a close standing order will move as close as possible up to its full movement allowance to the closest and the nearest enemy unit, or a specific area of the board, a piece of terrain. The unit will move up to its full movement allowance, but you could modify that by giving the unit a temporary lower maximum movement allowance. Movement allowance is printed here. You could, for example, say that this unit now has temporarily a maximum movement allowance up to, instead of 3.5. Also, you can identify the nearest enemy unit as a specific enemy unit that then becomes targeted by this unit, and the unit that has that order will try to move towards that unit as close as possible and as fast as possible. But until you change that order, simply this unit keeps moving towards a target. Another order that you can do is to hold. Pretty self-explanatory. The unit doesn't move, but if the unit is able to launch range attacks, it can still use range attacks. And then you have this order here, the R order, can only be used with units that have a ranged attack. The unit, similarly to the hold order, will not move and will simply shoot if it has an enemy unit that is within range and can be attacked with a range attack. However, if there isn't such a unit around, then the unit with an R order will move up to its full movement allowance, and then it will attack with a ranged attack. So your units will simply follow their orders. Some will move, some will not move during the movement and command phase, but during this phase you also can spend command points. The number of command points that you receive each turn depends on the size of the army that you're using. Each command point can be used for one of several advantages. You can spend a command point to change one of your standing orders. You cannot just change them at will. You can use a command point to take direct control of a unit for a turn. That means that you use that unit to do whatever you want. You tell that unit to do whatever you want for one turn without changing the standing order. That then goes back to being the effective standing order from next turn. You can rally a routing unit. A unit may get routed during combat or right before combat. You can use an army ability. Each army, the Carthaginian army and the Roman army, has some specific and unique abilities described on a card, such as this one. For example, the Carthaginians can spend a command action to increase their morale and or to receive an extra chance to hit the opponent, or they can spend army points to have an advantage during deployment. The Carthaginian player can see where the Roman player is deploying units, but it is something that you have to spend command points in order to use. And also you can spend a command point to draw a command card. Each player has a unique deck of command cards with different types of advantages that can be used during an attack, during defense, or simply during maneuver. And I like the idea of the cards because they definitely add an extra level of complexity, of depth here, because not only you have to choose when you want to use a certain card, but also when you want to get a certain card, because if you're getting cards, then you're not changing the maneuvers on the board, and of course there's a trade-off there. Combat comes in two flavors: range attacks and engaged attacks. Engaged, of course, is when units are locked in combat. Combat takes place during the combat phase, of course. During that phase, all units of the active player that have range attacks can shoot at an opponent, and then all units that are involved in engaged combat will attack the opponent. That means that also units of the non-active player that are engaged in combat get to attack. As it should be. They shouldn't be sitting here and just be attacked and then be waiting for their turn to attack back. In any case, combat resolution is pretty linear. When you attack, you use these three numbers here in the attack section of your card against the defense numbers of the opponent. The first number, the number in parentheses, is the number of dice that you roll. Those are D6s. And you need to roll your hit number, which is the second number, or less, and that number is modified by the first number in the defense section of the opponent. In this case, the number to hit for the Italian swordman attacking the Scutari is 3. For each die that gives a 3 or less, in this case, you have a hit, but then you need to roll those dice again to see if your hits actually did damage. And this time you're trying to match your strength, your might, as modified by the toughness of the opponent. 5 minus 2, it is 3 again. So in this case, the Italian swordmen re-roll the hit dice, and they need to roll 3 or less. If this second roll gives positive results, in this case for each die that shows a 3 or a less, you actually inflict a hit on the opponent, and each hit results in a wound that is marked on the track of the target unit that received that wound. Of course, when the target unit goes back to 0 wounds available, the unit is destroyed, but even before then, the unit will suffer penalties. When in the yellow or in the red, the unit has negative modifiers in combat. As you can see, those are modifiers that apply to the attack numbers and also to the morale, because when you cross off the last green box or the last yellow box or any red box, the unit has to take a route check. You roll 3d6 and you're trying to roll equal to or less than your morale, which is that number there with a little flag. If you fail the morale check, the unit routes, which is not good, but this is pretty much how combat works in general. As you can see, there are a lot of dice to roll because of the back and forth and because of the multiple rolls to resolve each attack. Another thing to keep in mind is the number of modifiers. There are quite a few modifiers that you need to take into account. Some only apply to engage attacks, some only to shooting attacks, and again, some to general. But this is the general idea. Once you remember what modifiers apply, well, then you have to go through the numbers to make sure you have the right number of dice and right numbers to hit. But other than that, this is very intuitive and very simple. And this is how the game works. You go back and forth, moving, attacking, giving commands to your units, playing cards, until one of the two sides is completely routed or destroyed. And this is the victory condition for a standard scenario. Otherwise, there may also be specific scenarios, and those may have different objectives. The game overall has all of the advantages of miniature gaming, of course, and that is great. All the depth that comes from moving a continuous pace, launching attacks and range attacks in a continuum space. Of course, you're playing with cards, so you do not have the visual appeal of three-dimensional miniatures, but you cannot have it both ways. You cannot have something that is as inexpensive as cards and looks as great as miniatures. You got to choose. If you are into miniatures mechanics and you do not care too much about the miniature artsy aspect of miniature gaming, then I think this is a great choice for you. Other aspects of the game that randomly come to mind. Some are pluses, some not so much. The rulebook is not very polished. I think it could be much clearer, because the game behind the rulebook really is a simple one, but it is not impossible to get past some of the phrasing of the rulebook, which is not the clearest that I've ever encountered. I like the fact that commands carry a certain momentum. This is something I always enjoy in games. The fact that you give certain orders and then you may regret them, and then you may not be able to correct and adjust your orders fast enough to follow the development of the battle. That feels right, that feels as it should be, and of course then you have an added level of depth there, because if you have been able to actually assign the right commands and foresee what was going to happen, then you have command points available to do other things, such as purchasing command cards. I like the extra level of nuance that you have thanks to the command cards that is added to the combat system, especially because this is really what the command cards mainly do. They affect combat. On the other hand, in combat you do have to roll a lot of dice, and I mean a lot. There are cases in which many units are locked in combat, so you just go through the line and you roll and roll and re-roll and roll again. Play a card that makes you re-roll. More rolls are going to be there. That's not everybody's cup of tea. Overall, this is a game that may have some minuses here and there, but none of those minuses to me outweighs the pluses, and the pluses are such that the game is a worthy one. This is definitely a fun game, inexpensive, easy to set up, easy to put away, but what's most important is fun to play, with decisions and nuances and challenges and levels of depth that can be discovered as the game proceeds and from game to game. So overall, a game that I definitely enjoyed playing, and one that I can see myself exploring more in the future, and maybe I will try to mix my Romans and my Carthaginians with some crazy fantasy monsters and see what happens in those confrontations.